Gen Z isn't buying because I said so. They want the why, the purpose behind the work. And while that frustrates some leaders, Brene Brown says it's actually the key to smarter teams and more courageous leadership. In this episode of Mind the Gen Gap, we'll unpack why Gen Z's questions matter, how the wrong kind of conflict can tear teams apart, and why communication, real, brave communication, is the ultimate leadership skill. Hi, my name is Goldie, your host for episode 45 of Mind the Gen Gap podcast.
And I'm Lakshan, your co host for this episode. Goldie and I are both ICF credentialed coaches with a shared passion for understanding generational dynamics, not just in theory, but in real people's lives.
Today's episode is inspired by an interview that was given by Brene Brown. You probably know her from her famous TED Talk on vulnerability or her best-selling books like Dare to Lead. She's a researcher and storyteller who's changed entirely the way we think about leadership and human connection. Whilst we don't have Brene with us today, we definitely want to spotlight her key points that will make for a very good conversation and hopefully open our minds to think a little more humanly about our Gen Z and leadership. So Brown begins by pointing out that actually intergenerational work is quite complex. We all know this thanks to the work that we've also done with it, don't we, Lakshan? We were all raised very differently and with very different ideas about what success looks like. She even admits, actually, that she gets nervous lumping whole groups into generations, but also says there is some truth to it. And here's the part that made me laugh. She says that when people start teasing or trashing Gen Z, she reminds us that it's usually the very same people who raised them. Ouch. That was a reality check for me, especially because I am raising two Zs myself. But it's an important one because every generation inherits both the strengths and the blind spots from the one before. So, Lakshan, I'm intrigued by this idea of success. And I don't want to label us right now, but all I ask you to tell me is, what does success look like to you?
So, first thing I want to share is that when you mentioned that, while we don't have Brene Brown with us today, I was thinking, yeah, maybe someday we'll have her, but today is not that day yet.
Indeed.
That maybe can be another idea of what success looks like for us, Anyway, for me personally, so I was funnily enough talking about this to someone today. So for my birthday, I got gifted this lovely journal notebook thing, and I was told that the your birthday week, right, the 7 days, are like the those days are the days which have the highest potency of any manifestation that you kind of write down for yourself. Anything that you see it as a manifestation, right? So I was thinking, what do I write? I wrote a few things. Uh, More time for myself, uh, a greater sense of abundance, more experiences that I can share with my family, things of that nature. The wealth aspect, the fame, this traditional understanding of success was not something that occurred to me at all. And it's so interesting because I'm in my last year of my 20s now. But looking back at my early 20s, I was a lot more gung ho about, making it big and achievements and accolades and all of those things. But somehow I'm like, that's fundamentally not what's important for me. Uh, what's important for me is family, is people that I'm around, and living in a state of abundance. That is what success would mean for me. Feeling abundant. It need not mean things per se, but a sense of operating from a place of abundance, and being known as someone who can be trusted in a professional setting, person setting, and where if a person decides to work with me or be around me, there's a sense of safety that they experience. So that is what success as an idea is for me, which is so far fetched from what it was like 5 years ago, even. So I think I've become a lot wiser in my years.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the way you explain success definitely makes me think how my own definition has evolved over time. And I think a large part of me recognizes that it's deeply rooted sometimes with how I saw it growing up. And there are bits and bobs of, what I felt my parents portrayed as success that I carried with me. But like you said, it can change over time. And I think this is the important point to sort of mention here. When you're working with a different cohort that's not yours, it can be very helpful to know what their definition is at the time, because you sort of enable this getting on the same page. And you may vary, which, because when I heard you tell me what success looks like for you right now, it gives me a really meaningful insight into who and what you believe in. And that I think is the beginning of how we would manage in a leadership setting, perhaps. So again, backing up what Brene said, it does look different to everyone. And now we go on to the next point that she reflects on, which is how Gen Z was actually raised. And I know that I'm very touchy feely about this because I have got the two Gen Zs in my own home. So many parents, especially Gen Xers, and Brene herself is one, she said that they tried to protect their kids from trauma, but somewhere along the way, adversity got confused with trauma. And that's the problem, because adversity is actually good for us. It builds resilience and grit. Trauma, however, is harmful, and adversity stretches. So there's this distinction that she's, displaying in her conversation. And so the part of the challenge with Gen Z in the workplace is that they sometimes just haven't had as much practice navigating adversity. And this is not their fault, right? It just means that leaders need to help cultivate resilience rather than assuming it's already there. So I think this discernment gives us so many opportunities to look at, plenty of examples around us and in our community, inviting us to still rectify from parenting strategies that could have potentially crippled their, resilience. I can definitely vouch for this. And I think a lot of the narrative comes from Gen Z have a reputation traditionally to be those latchkey kids. So we have been thrown into the deep end quite quickly from a young age and had to be resilient, which was a time that wasn't very maybe so nice for many of us. And so subconsciously, we don't want to give that to our children. Yet we confused it with trauma and may have crippled them as a result of it. This is what's coming up for me, as a parent. I want to know what you're thinking.
I like that term that you used, right? Which is trauma is harmful, and adversity stretches. I really like that because the visual that I got was of a rubber band stretching,
Yeah.
right? It's almost as if parents of Gen Z kids, because of the way they were raised, Gen X, as you said, having seen a lot of adversity, not wanting to kind of trauma, even not wanting to allow their kids to experience it. It's like you can't break a rubber band if you don't stretch it. So let's not even
Yeah.
stretch it, right? So that's the immediate visual that came up for me. But unless you make it a point to continue to stretch it, the rubber band is itself doesn't know what it's capable of, right? How far is capable of stretching itself before snapping, and
Yeah.
what degree of utility it may have, knowing how much it can withstand the stretch, right? So that's like a metaphor or visual that came up for me. And I'm just another thing that a lot of parents in general say, not just like Gen X parents, but in general, one of the things that growing up, especially, you'd get told when you complain about going to school and all that. Uh, they'd be like, oh, when we had to go to school, we had to walk 50 kilometers or whatever number of kilometers, and swim, this particular length, and get on a train. It takes us 2 hours to get there. Whatever, all these stories. We had to carry buckets, whatever, all these stories. And I'm not disputing any of them. I'm sure some of them may be exaggerated, but large majority of what is being shared is very true. And it's these same parents who complain about that and you not being grateful about your how easy it is for you to go to school, who also say, hey, I want to give my kids a better life than I had. So
Yes.
it's both of these points are important element. I think the way it's been acted upon, so to say, is has not served the generation by and large. That being said, I have, of course, noticed plenty of Gen Z kids who had a particular mindset about, say, being resilient or handling pressure or whatever it is, who weren't particularly good at it, once they got into the workforce, they kind of like really understood, okay, this is real life now. I can't be complaining about things and cribbing about things and expecting anything to come my way. I have to, buckle up and get work done. If it means I suffer, I suffer. So that is
Yeah.
something that I've seen. It definitely is a mindset thing. There is one set of people who operate from that victimhood state, for the lack of a better term, versus those who are like, hey man, like it's my life. At the end of the day, I have to make it work. Nobody's coming to save me. Those people I've noticed have been able to develop a sense of resilience much later in their lives. When I say later, I mean like in their 20s, um, as opposed to how it must have been for you guys, for example, right?
Yeah.
Having to develop it much earlier. But that is promise because it is possible. That's just something that all of these things are coming up for me. I just
Yeah.
wanted to throw all of them into on the table today.
No, I mean, essentially what I am picking up is resilience and grit is inborn in you, but it needs to be exercised. It's a muscle that needs to be constantly stretched and pulled, going with your metaphor of the rubber band. And if you haven't been given the space or the playground to be resilient before you enter the workforce, you are you're a raw canvas. So there's opportunity still there, but leaders have to be cognizant of this. Otherwise, they get labeled as, otherwise being called lazy or snowflake. It's something that goes hand in hand with not having that stoic mindset, which you have to develop at some point in your life. So that would take us then to remember that they are doing everything much later, like getting married or getting financially independent, because the early years are not encouraged for them to become, those streetwise or street smart kids, which maybe the Gen X's come from. But again, this is again generalizing a lot, and I do want to point out that we do have examples that have otherwise proven us completely wrong. So, when we think about Gen Z not having a playground or a canvas with multiple experiences for resilience and grit, we also have to understand that they may not always have the solutions or quick thinking on the why and the how of a situation, because they just haven't had that opportunity to parallel in the working world. And this comes to the next point, which Brene makes, and it fits in quite nicely, because she says Gen Z is, they are not going to do anything without the why. So, they don't believe in the yes, chef attitude because they want to know the purpose behind the task. We understand that, the purpose driven Gen Z is something that has been a label that they've received. But here's a theory. It's come because they haven't had enough opportunities to understand the why beforehand. So now that they are being given these responsibilities and taking ownership of things, they obviously want to know why, and they won't just nod and follow, or that's why they challenge it. So if they say, wait, and this is an example that she gave verbatim, if you need this data for a 5 o'clock meeting, you're asking for the wrong set of numbers. And honestly, this can be frustrating for like older managers, but it can also make the work smarter. So the key is whether leaders are able to see those questions as pushback or opportunities for better thinking. And it brings us to follow up her point. An important distinction that she makes as a consequence of this observation is task conflict versus emotional conflict. So, task conflict is when people challenge each other's ideas or methods. This is healthy and it actually leads to better solutions. But when we don't have skills to manage that tension, task conflict can slip into emotional conflict, blaming, resentment, side meetings, silos, and the whole mess that essentially breaks teams apart because you're making it about yourself. Yeah. And I think here's the real kicker. The problem isn't Gen Z. The problem is whether leaders and organizations know how to hold that tension in a productive way. Lakshan, we've relentlessly advocated, how Gen Z is that purpose-driven generation. And this idea of leading a conversation with a why often justifies it to some degree. And I've added the layer of if you haven't had a playground to work with, so you obviously have a questioning mind. So somewhere what I'm hearing is Brene is observing that the why can actually be a deal maker or breaker if not managed well. What are your thoughts on this?
I feel like there's so much to unpack here from what you've mentioned. It's as you said, no, like because they don't have a playground that they can kind of like dip into in terms of experiences that they can learn from. They're asking these questions which may seem super trivial to the older managers, um, but it's simply coming from a place of genuine curiosity. It's not like they're trying to be disrespectful or anything. It's like, hey, okay, the older generations, they can understand, okay, fine, this must be the reason it's important. They make an assumption which may be fairly accurate based on the data they've had from past experiences professionally and personally in their lives, right? But when those same experiences are not there for Gen Z, they have
Yeah.
nothing to look back at and say this must be the reason why it's important or what makes it important or whatever. And instead they genuinely ask, hey, what is the reason for this, like, why? And it may be seen as a sign of disrespect or negligence or incompetence, even, but it's not
Yeah.
about that. It's like another thing that came up for me. I feel like this is a little tangential but still relevant. Is that when I was undergoing my training for becoming a team coach, which is essentially a skill set where instead of coaching this in individual, you coach the entire team as one unit. One thing that my mentor was saying is that there are organizations where there are, say, toxic leaders or managers, the ones who really drive the team members and get the work done, who get rewarded for doing so because they met certain numbers at the cost of the team that they're meant to be leading. And when you kind of end up exploring coaching with those kind of teams who wonder, hey, why is this team not performing at the way it can perform and all that stuff? The question is not what is wrong with the leader. The question more so is what in the current system and culture is allowing this type of a leader to thrive,
Yeah.
right? So it is definitely a systemic thing, and that's what kind of shifts things from this task conflict to emotional conflict, because you don't have the skills to notice things from a systemic point of view, and instead you're just pointing fingers and silos and the whole mess that you were mentioning with respect to teams. That is another thing that's coming up for me. Again, instead of seeing it as pushback and looking at it as opportunity, there is nothing stopping the older generations also from asking why.
Yeah.
If when you shared your example of what Brenny had said, if
Yeah.
someone wants a set of data for the 5 o'clock meeting, and this person says, hey, you're asking for the wrong set of numbers, I believe is what was said.
Yes.
Instead of taking offense or being frustrated, you're also allowed to ask why. just because
Absolutely.
just because you're fed up of hearing why being asked to you. I think it's also telling that you probably don't ask why enough yourself,
Mm.
and that is what is making it frustrating for you to hear it so often, especially from the younger generations. I think there's a lot to reflect on for us as leaders in organizations as well. It's similar to how, say, in coaching or even therapy, you're asked to reflect on what makes your triggers trigger you, right? So it's kind
Yeah.
of like there's a lot of learning I think that can come up, which will show up beyond just you. It'll show up with respect to the entire team and the entire like organization even at some point. So I totally agree that it's a matter of learning to hold this tension that is going to
Yeah.
exist in a
Yeah.
way that kind of serves the greater purpose and not just point fingers at each other and blame.
You know, as you were talking about reflecting on your own managerial skills and wondering why you are reluctant to then respond with a why. And is that something that should be encouraged more by the managers? But you know what I just realized, they too come from being managed, probably by a manager who didn't give them the space to ask why.
It's the yes chef
The yes chef,
is
and
the way
this.
you answer, right? Yeah.
Right. And whilst that has worked in the past, which is very fear driven, I think, fear driven KPIs are really fast. You can get them. But the sustainability of that is not going to last, especially if you have a generation like Z who are asking the why. So there's also mention, by Brene, who says, well, are we going to be uh, living in fear and there's a mention by the journalist who says uh, Elon Musk leadership, or are we moving away from that? In the same way that our DEI, programs being removed from companies purely because they were scared of certain people in the company and didn't, they wanted to have the structure in place. But now if this fear is removed from the equation altogether, perhaps that's where we need to be, flourishing in a better way as both, Gen Z plus the managers who are leading them. And I think the one of the final things that would sort of describe this whole idea of let's speak about the why in a more constructive way is communication, which Brene calls the heart of leadership, and so rightly said, and she says it's not the shiny or the inspirational kind, but the gritty, real kind that actually requires a lot of clarity, a lot of discipline, and of course accountability. And clarity, she says, means being precise, so making the ask, the request clearly. What do you mean? And what do you need? Discipline, she says, is choosing the right medium. So maybe you have to reread that email, or maybe you have to pick up the phone rather than firing off a text. And accountability, she says, means owning the impact of your own words, whether it's the boomer manager or the Gen Zer who is in replying, and saying, yes, I meant that, or no, that wasn't my intent, and then apologizing. And so here's the tough truth. Most of us were actually never taught how to do this. I don't remember at school being taught how to own my words. Workplaces certainly don't teach it. Yet it's a skill that holds teams together. It holds leadership together. I love this part of the conversation, and as you know, communication is a big value for both of us. But I want to hear your. I'm curious, as I think that would be the right way to say. What is your view, Lakshan, on communication? At least because you do work with more than two generations on a daily basis. If I'm not wrong.
So it's more than thinking about other people that I'm working with. I was just thinking about how it is between the two of us, right? Because we are also a wonderful representation of generational diversity, and
Yeah.
this that we're doing right now is definitely a more professional endeavor. So we are operating as professionals when it comes to the work that we're doing here as well. I was looking at the 3 points, clarity, discipline, accountability. I can't agree more on its importance, because just even today, like, I wanted to clarify, the timing of when we're getting onto a platform to have this conversation.
Yeah.
Because if that wasn't there, then there would be a mess, right? And of course, irrespective of um, which one of us messes up, we're more than happy to be accountable and say, hey, this is on me.
Yeah.
At no point will either of us pin the blame on the other. um, and we are as disciplined, we try to be as disciplined as we need to be, because I think we both understand that the way that we operate, especially with respect to the podcast, we don't, email is not a medium that we use. We
No.
are a lot more WhatsAppy people. So we understand that, hey, this is the way to go about doing it, and to always cross check every piece of communication that goes on between the two of us, to make sure, hey, have I from my end done everything possible to understand what the other person is trying to say. If I have done my part and I still not have understood, then of course I'm going to ask for clarification. If I have understood it incorrectly and acted on it based on my incorrect understanding, I will own up and say, hey, that's on me. So I can't agree more on this thing. And this absolutely also shows up with the work I do, with the other work that I do as well. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Um, the discipline factor is super important. Otherwise, you cannot be on the same page and expect to get something done that is beyond you. I think
Yeah.
that's important. If you're trying to build something that's beyond you, a relationship, again, it's one thing that's beyond you as well. It's not just about you, it's more than you, right? If you're trying to build anything that's more than you, I think these three aspects are so important. As you said, communication is something that we are so passionate about. There's so much we can share about that. But
Yeah.
for now, this is where I would like to leave it, for my end at least.
Thank you for giving such a wonderful example, actually, and so so tangibly interesting to understand, because it happened literally this morning. And what I'm picking up is we have this subconscious habit of literally playing those 3 points out in our heads interchangeably, which I think is where the magic source is when it comes to good communication. And I'm trying to reflect on times when perhaps the communication has been poor, and what I analyze is that one of the 3 points was not ticked properly, whether it was from my end or yours. This is just between us, but even in our other settings and relationships, I think the same would be applicable. So obviously, as we said, this is such a passionate topic we can go on about. And today, I think we have covered in a very short span of time quite a lot of things. And I do want to thank the New York Times, obviously, for the interview that they did, with Brene, which actually inspired us to have this conversation. It's the first time we're doing an episode like this where we're talking about an expert who's not with us. But again, with the high hopes that one day perhaps we can have her with us, and that would be our success for sure. If you have enjoyed this conversation, do hop over to watch episode 4, which is diving deep into generational misconceptions. And if you're listening to us on Spotify, check out episode 4 over there. With that, we've come to the end of episode 45 of Mind the Gen Gap podcast. I've been your host, Goldie.
And I've been your co host, Lakshan. Thank you so much for listening, watching, and tuning in all the way to the very end.
Muchas gracias.
See you in the next one.
Hasta pronto.
Bye.